So with the secretory phase, the uterine glands enlarge and they increase secretions, and that contributes to growth of the endometrial arteries, all in preparation for the potential arrival of the fertilized oocyte if sexual intercourse is to occur and if the oocyte gets fertilized. And if that happens within the uterine tube, 7 to 10 days later, the developing zygote would potentially implant in the uterine wall. In the increase in the functional layer of the endometrial or the endometrium is due to increased progesterone levels and estrogen levels, here in black and red, that are secreted by the corpus luteum, which is the remnant structure of the ovulated tertiary or mature follicle, all in preparation for the potential arrival of the fertilized egg embryo as it works its way through the uterine tube into the uterus. And the corpus luteum will remain active for about 12 days, at which point it degrades and becomes the corpus albicans, and its secretion of progesterone and estrogen starts to drop. If no pregnancy occurs, then those drop in those hormones leads to the menstruation back at day 0 of the uterine cycle or ovarian cycle or menstrual cycle, in which case the functional layer of the endometrium is lost, again because no pregnancy has occurred. If a pregnancy has occurred, if a pregnancy occurs and the developing embryo implants in the uterine wall, a placenta begins to grow. The embryo itself secretes hormones to keep the corpus luteum active for a certain period of time, and that means that the levels of progesterone and estrogen remain higher or high, and then the functional layer is retained and it's not shed or lost, which means the developing fetus is retained. So menarche is the first uterine cycle and menstruation that occurs at puberty in the female. Ages, it's variable, but 11 to 12. Menopause is the cessation of the uterine cycle, so the last uterine cycle and menstruation. That is the end of the reproductive years for the female, and that's again variable, ages 45 to 55. And the reason for that is basically a failure of the ovaries to respond to gonadotropic hormones from the anterior pituitary and the loss of viable follicles within the ovaries. Moving to the vagina. Muscular tube about 3.5 inches long, roughly 9 centimeters. The cervix of the uterus projects somewhat into the vaginal canal, forming the vaginal fornix, kind of this little indentation region. It is structurally found between the urethra and the rectum. Functions: passageway for elimination of the menstrual fluids during menstruation or menses, and also the copulatory organ in the female in the sense that it receives the penis during intercourse and holds the sperm in the semen initially, and the sperm, at least some of the sperm, would enter into the uterus via the cervix. And it is the lower portion of the birth canal during labor. Histology: the epithelial layer is a mucosal stratified squamous epithelium, and it does have rugae. a slightly acidic environment that would help reduce pathogenic organisms and infections. The muscularis layer has an inner and outer smooth muscle layers. And then moving on to the external genitalia, also referred to as the vulva or the pudendum. The mons pubis is this anterior mound of adipose tissue underneath the epithelium over the pubic symphysis. The labia majora are the larger outer folds of skin and some adipose tissue internally. Developmentally, they are homologous to the scrotum in the male. The labia minora are the smaller inner folds of skin, and they are naturally hairless. The vestibule is a region that is bounded by the labia minora, and it includes the vaginal opening or orifice, the urethral opening, which is anterior to it, and the openings to the urethral glands, which are the lesser and greater vestibular glands that produce mucus that's for lubrication during sexual intercourse. And the greater vestibular glands are homologous to the bulbourethral glands in the male. So again, another example of homologous structures between males and females. The clitoris in the female is composed of erectile tissue. It's an erectile body, and it itself is homologous to the penis in the male. It enlarges during sexual excitation and is sensitive to stimulation. It also contains a corpora cavernosa and glands clitoris in this case, and a covering clitoral hood or a prepuce. Again, similar homologous structures to the penis in the male. And it has sensory and erotic stimulation function, again, homologous to the penis in the male. And then the breasts or the mammary glands, both genders, males and females, have them. They are larger in the female and produce milk to nourish the young. So lactation is milk production. And the breasts do have fat pads over the pectoralis major muscle. Structurally, there is the nipple and the surrounding areola, a region of somewhat darker pigmented skin surrounding the nipple. The sebaceous or areolar glands, which produce milk, and then adipose tissue. There are suspensory ligaments that help support the breast tissue. And then the apocrine glandular tissue, the alveoli, are arranged in lobules within the breast. So then the alveoli and lobes, and then the lactiferous ducts. So the alveoli within the lobes produce the milk. The milk goes through the lactiferous ducts and is stored in the lactiferous sinuses and is released when the baby is suckling. I mentioned, let me see. Oh yeah, the sebaceous or areolar glands. The sebaceous glands are found within the areola. Okay, so with pregnancy, the mammary glands, the breasts develop and enlarge in response to prolactin and growth hormone and human placental lactogen from the placenta. They all contribute to, excuse me, mammary gland development and then milk production within the lobules within the breast. And then suckling from the baby is the stimuli to produce oxytocin, remember, from the posterior pituitary gland, and that leads to milk ejection or lactation. So mother's breast milk is best for our developing babies. And that is it for this chapter. And that is it for the chapters we're covering for this course.